The Leslie Marshall Show, the only true democracy in talk radio, of, for, and by you, the people. Live nationwide and streaming live at lesliemarshallshow.com. Call in with your thoughts at 888-6-LESLIE.
Welcome back to the Leslie Marshall Show. I am Natalia Abrams, and today I'm joined by our Student Debt Crisis Center team, Cody Hounanian and Sabrina Calazans. We are Student Debt Crisis Center, and today we are yet again taking over for the Leslie Marshall Show and discussing all of the recent developments around student loan debt. So again, thank you so much for joining and tuning in today. My name is Natalia Abrams. I'm the president here at Student Debt Crisis Center, and just want to check in. We have you, Cody, on the line.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Cody. And Sabrina, we have you as well.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So at Student Debt Crisis Center, our mission is to center the needs and voices of student loan borrowers by partnering with allies and impacting public policy to once and for all end the student debt crisis. And if you would like to learn more about the work we do, or especially read through Student Debt Crisis Center borrower stories, there's hundreds, thousands of stories on our website to really understand the plight of student loan borrowers. You can visit our website at studentdebtcrisis.org. That is studentdebtcrisis.org again, or find us on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram with the handle @debtcrisis.org. So we have a lot to discuss today, and a very special guest that has worked with our organization for almost a decade now. But if you've missed our last show or want to know what's going on in the world of student debt, this is the place to be. And we'll get started with you, Cody. Can you give us a refresher since our last show, please?
Yeah, well, the last few times we have taken over the Leslie Marshall Show, we've been talking about one of the top issues that student loan borrowers and others are tracking right now, which is the president's debt cancellation plan, and subsequently 2 legal challenges that have made their way to the Supreme Court. So just as a refresher, the president last year announced an executive action that would cancel up to $20,000 in student loan debt for millions of student loan borrowers with federal student loans. This is and was a transformative action that was in direct response to not only the historic student debt crisis, but the unprecedented challenges that borrowers faced due to the pandemic. And you and I know that the impact of that pandemic, both economically and health-wise, continues to this day. And so the president takes this action to help borrowers, and immediately opponents to student loan borrowers and transformative policies come out and try to attack it. And we saw a flurry of lawsuits, most of them thrown out immediately, but we have these 2 that have made it to the Supreme Court. On February 28th, oral arguments were held in these Supreme Court cases. We, along with hundreds of other allies, were on the ground at the Supreme Court for the People's Rally for Student Debt Cancellation, calling for support, a positive, joyous event saying that borrowers need this relief, that will help Americans prosper and live more fulfilling lives. Now, we're waiting for a final decision from the Supreme Court, and that's likely going to happen later this summer, likely in June at some point, although we do not know exactly when that will happen. And then one other update I want to share, and these details are still kind of in the works, but there are other opponents who are concocting new absurd legal challenges to try to impact the president's ability to cancel student debt in this way. And so we are tracking another lawsuit related to a case called Sweet v. Cardona, which essentially provided relief to people who are defrauded by predatory schools who essentially scam their students. That case provided relief to hundreds of thousands of students, but a challenge to that settlement, $1 billion settlement for borrowers who will have their debt canceled, may have a domino effect that spills over into our fight to cancel student debt. So something else to watch. So essentially, we've got big challenges, legal challenges to student debt cancellation, even though we all know that it's legal and the president does have this authority.
It just feels like, every new week, a new lawsuit, right, Cody? And Sabrina, we're getting the SoFi lawsuit. We saw something, attempting to go after the payment pause with SoFi and again on Friday. And even this Sweet versus Cardona lawsuit. Cody, can you talk a little bit about how this could impact the overall debt cancellation lawsuit? There was something new this week on that, correct?
Yeah, so the way this case could impact debt cancellation is this. The president has essentially many tools in his toolkit to cancel student loan debt. And for defrauded student loan borrowers, the president has used what is called settlement and compromise. Essentially, the Higher Education Act, which Congress passed many, many years ago, gives the president the power to erase student debt in response to certain issues. And this case erased the student debt of people who were scammed by predatory colleges. But the colleges are now challenging this settlement, saying, no, 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 this debt should not be erased, and the president doesn't have this authority. If this case works in the favor of these schools, it would potentially threaten the president's authority more broadly. But one thing I want to say too, Natalia, and you kind of brought this up, these legal challenges don't have to be successful to still have an impact. We are seeing these lawsuits, as meritless and silly as they are, muck up the system through injunctions and pauses that have real world impact on student loan borrowers, even though they haven't won the legal case yet. So there's a lot of nefarious legal maneuvering happening right now to try to impact relief for student loan borrowers.
Yeah, Cody, that's such a good point. I mean, that's what borrowers are experiencing right now with the debt cancellation lawsuit. It has not been deemed illegal. In fact, we all believe that it's highly legal and the president has the authority. But because of the courts, there's an injunction and borrowers can't access that relief. And, on that note, Sabrina, I know you work hand in hand with student loan borrowers every day. What are you hearing from borrowers with these kind of constant barrage of attacks and lawsuits?
Yeah, I think we're getting a lot of, questions from folks, and there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. I think folks are trying to prepare, ahead for if payments resume in September, how are they going to be able to afford that? And what are they going to have to forego because of it? And I know that at SDCC, we released our Beyond Student Debt report, which talks about how borrowers are struggling to meet their basic needs. So we see a lot of borrowers who are struggling with food insecurity, housing insecurity, being able to afford healthcare and mental health resources. And so we're seeing folks already struggling now. And so the thought of payments having to resume is something that is causing a lot of anxiety and stress for millions of folks across the country.
Yeah, that seems to be on every survey we do. Always the top one is the anxiety and stress that borrowers feel amongst all those other basic needs issues that you've been discussing. And in just a little bit, in our next segment, we're going to bring on, as I mentioned, a great advocate and student loan borrower that we've worked with. So you'll get to hear from a borrower themselves. And we are, in our next segment and beyond, we're going to be talking about the fact that student loan debt is an intergenerational problem. And this is something that, within our circles, we talk about all the time, but it's really important to discuss with you all. In fact, more people over the age of 30 than under the age of 30 have student loan debt. So we see this impacting all generations. And it's our belief that we need to join together, not create an intergenerational divide when it comes to student loan debt. And so while balances have increased across all age groups, growth has been seen for the greatest, the growth has been the greatest for older borrowers. We see for borrowers over the age of 50 are the fastest increasing balances and the most impacted by student loan debt. So today, families have more student loan debt at a younger age, and we see them carry that debt for decades. and decades, much longer than they ever intended to take on that debt. So I think it's really important, Sabrina, when you talk about, how borrowers are impacted. And I know, Sabrina, you're going to stay with me in this next segment. Cody, you're going to join us in a little bit. And in the next segment, we're going to bring on Rosemary Anderson, this amazing advocate and borrower and friend that I just mentioned. We're very honored to have Rosemary join us and look forward to having you all really hear, you hear a lot from us all the time. I think it's important to hear directly from student loan borrowers and what their decades fight looks like, especially working alongside us. So we're very excited to have that in the next segment, and stay with us. Stay with us and we will be right back.
If you miss Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recognize them? By their clothes, their age, the way they speak? Would you notice an 8-year-old girl who's not excited for
summer break because she may not be having lunch again until September?
Or a single father of 2 who works 3
part-time jobs and still can't put enough food on the table?
Or maybe a mother who cleans offices at night,
hoping to find meeting leftovers to take home to her hungry family.
Or a war veteran who's having a hard time
landing a job and getting back on his feet.
I am the 1 in 8 Americans who struggle with hunger. People you pass by every day but never knew were hungry. I am hunger in America.
Hunger can be hard to recognize. Learn why at IamHungerInAmerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America, 200 Food Banks Strong, and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Leslie Marshall Show. This is Natalia Abrams, and I am joined by Sabrina Calazans and our very special guest, Rosemary Anderson. We are taking over for the Leslie Marshall Show yet again and discussing all the recent developments around student loan debt. Please give us a follow over at Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at debtcrisis.org, or you can go to our website at www.studentdebtcrisis.org. And now we're going to talk a bit about the intergenerational impacts of student loan debt. And Sabrina, I know you have some kind of crazy stats to throw at us. Talk to me about the intergenerational impacts.
Yeah, there's a lot of really shocking statistics that are related to older borrowers and borrowers of all ages, but we're just seeing some really alarming trends here. We see that most older borrowers hold loans taken out for their own education rather than their children's education. And that's something that you touched upon in the first segment, Natalia, that folks are now carrying their own balances for longer, and it's for their own education. We're seeing balances of borrowers who are 50 and older increasing 500% since 2004, with nearly 1/3 being in default, which is just terrifying. That's immoral, that's wrong. Another survey by AARP conducted with the Association of Young Americans found that across generations, student debt is impeding many Americans' abilities to save money to buy a home, a car, or to retire. So it's delaying or even putting off the opportunity of pursuing the American dream and just being able to build generational wealth and investing in people's futures. And that millennials and Generation Xers also said that their student debt has prevented or delayed their ability to save for their children's education. And this is increasing the likelihood that their children then are able to attend college and creates that intergenerational student loan debt cycle. And so that's something that we're going to be talking about today with our special guest. So I'm going to toss it back to you, Natalia, to introduce her.
Yes, and somebody that has experienced a lot of what we're talking about today is Rosemary Anderson. Rosemary is a 66-year-old, thank you for letting me share your age, borrower advocate who recently retired after spending her entire professional career in public service roles. Thank you for that too. Rosemary decided to go back to school to earn her degree when her 2 children were small, as she felt a degree would enhance her job and career opportunities. She went on to earn her undergraduate and graduate degrees in the mid-90s. And I know from working with you, Rosemary, for years, had had a decade plus of student loan debt. So Rosemary, can you tell us your student debt story?
Yes, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it and appreciate your advocacy over all these years. Yeah, so my student loan debt, as I said, as Natalia said in the introduction, I went back to school in my 30s to get my degrees. I had probably 6 or 7 different loans by the time I graduated. And at the time in the mid 90s, when they offered a debt consolidation for borrowers like myself with what was then a lower interest rate at 8.25%, I took advantage of that program. I consolidated all of my debts so that I only had one payment every month instead of, at the time, literally writing out checks to each one. So my total student loan debt at that time for my undergraduate and graduate degrees was $64,000. I had an unsubsidized loan and a subsidized loan. Over the course of time, as many borrowers are acutely aware, your loans are transferred from one contract servicer to another. And oftentimes the payments that you've made or other kinds of noteworthy thing associated with your account got lost in the shuffle. So fast forward to 2023, that $64,000 worth of debt that I could never refinance. That was a piece I forgot to mention, is that once you consolidated those loans, the very fine print was that you could never refinance them. And as most people know, you cannot discharge student loan debt through bankruptcy. So fast forward again to 2023, that debt had grown in spite of my paying on them every month to $179,000. So that is, again, not a story that's uncommon with the millions of borrowers who are suffering from student loan debt, and the anxiety, the financial distress, and so forth that causes for folks. I've always told Natalia and in my other interviews that I was one of the lucky ones because that debt would die with me rather than it being inherited by my children or go against my estate. Because I was an older borrower, I was fortunate to have a home at that time and didn't lose my home as a result of my student loan debt. So all of those things were the good fortune side of my student loan debt, and the bad fortune was, just like many other borrowers, there was no relief program that was really targeted for older Americans that were in public service, because I would have had to work until I was 85 years old in order to make enough qualifying payments under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. That's really it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Rosemary. And I think your story, like you said, is there's so many folks out there who are going through the same thing currently, and it's just heartbreaking. But what stands out to me about you is that you've stuck in this fight and continued advocating for all of these years, despite you feeling like this would never go away. And so how did you get involved in this advocacy, and what continues to fuel that fire for you?
Thank you for that question, Sabrina. Yes, I very early on in the student debt story, there became online forums that you could make comments about what your story was and so forth. And Natalia actually saw one of my comments and connected me with a CBS reporter who then that started my being the unfortunate or fortunate face of senior loan borrowers. And at the time, as I said, because my student debt couldn't be refinanced, and because it's so large that all of the programs up to this point were not going to in any way diminish my student loan debt. It was really only the Public Service Loan Forgiveness waiver and review that I was able to actually take advantage of a program that might then help me. And in fact, it did. And I'd be happy to share that part of my story.
Of course. Yeah, just to expand a little on your activism, because I know that you have been the spokesperson, as you said, for seniors with student loan debt. Can you talk a little bit about the hearing? Because that's where I remember clearly meeting you in person for the first time. And so, that moniker, for better or worse, did lead to an amazing opportunity.
It did. So I had an opportunity in 2014 to testify before the Senate Committee on Aging, of which Elizabeth Warren and Susan Collins and others were on that committee, and to tell my story along with a representative from the Department of Education, and to really highlight that there were so many different aspects of that student loan debt that had not really been highlighted or daylighted before, and most of which was that as a public servant, if I defaulted on my student loans, I was then subject to dismissal. I could be fired if I did that. So.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about your public service, and there's a good twist to this story with Rosemary Anderson that I can't wait for you all to hear. I'm Natalia Abrams, filling in for Leslie Marshall, this SDCC takeover. Stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.
Look through your children's eyes, and you'll see the true magic of a forest. It's a storybook world for them. You look and see a tree. They see the wrinkled face of a wizard with arms outstretched to the sky. They see treasure in pebbles. They see a windy path that could lead to adventure. When they discover the forest, their imagination is inspired by the smell of pine, the crunch of leaves beneath their feet, the sound of birds calling out for attention. And they see you, their fearless guide through this fascinating forest world. You are the hero in this book. This is a memory being made. This is what they will laugh about years from now. These are the roots, grounding and nourishing them.
Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. Then look through your children's eyes and discover the magic all around you. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Leslie Marshall Show. This is Natalia Abrams, and we are joined by borrower advocate Rosemary Anderson and my colleague Sabrina Calazans. We are filling in yet again for the Leslie Marshall Show, the Student Debt Crisis Center takeover. And today we're discussing the intergenerational impacts of the student debt crisis. And before the break, we were talking with Rosemary about her student debt story and her decade of advocacy in this space. And I let you know there would be a great twist. So Rosemary, I'd love to hear what's been going on with you lately and your student debt story.
Thank you, Natalia. So yes, in late February, I was actually then connected with a CNN reporter ahead of the Supreme Court People's Rally in February, and we had made arrangements to have a photographer come and finish that interview. And the day between my phone call with the reporter and when that was supposed to transpire, I got a letter from the Department of Education saying that my student loan debt had been forgiven. I immediately contacted Natalia and said, this obviously can't be true and it can't be real. And I finally found someone who corroborated, yes, that is true, that in the course of that public service loan forgiveness audit and review that became available to borrowers in, I believe it was October of 2021, I went through the process of submitting all of my employment history and so forth, and which resulted in the forgiveness of those two loans. It was, I told Natalia and Sabrina, I cried for 3 days because
I cried with you, Rosemary.
It was such an emotional thing to have that news that came truly out of the blue for me. It was a miracle. And what that meant for me, and again, that $64,000 original debt had been forgiven at $179,000 in spite of paying on those loans for decades. And so what that meant to me in terms of the financial liability, that millstone that has been around my neck for all these years, was beyond miraculous, and also meant that I wasn't going to have to stress, as Sabrina mentioned earlier in the segments, about all the student loan borrowers who are now preparing for the restart of those payments, depending on the outcome of the Supreme Court case. So it's just an amazing, happy ending for me that I never dreamed that would ever happen in my lifetime. And it's because of the changes and the advocacy of millions of people over the course of these decades that has made that possible, those audits and reviews. Because as Natalia mentioned in my introduction, I spent my entire professional life in public service, and that was never reflected in my student loan history in the way that it did through that review and audit. So it felt amazing. It still does. I still can hardly believe it's true, but I had the letter up in my office in my home, just reminding me that that I'm one of the very, very lucky ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll never forget, Rosemary, seeing your email come in and just letting us know that your debt had been canceled. I mean, it really was incredible timing, and it was just perfect. And I know that it was through the PSLF waiver, so through a repayment plan for a public service loan forgiveness. And I know that those changes to that temporary waiver is what allowed you to get that your debt canceled, which is a really big deal. It has helped hundreds of thousands of folks across the country who, were entitled to this relief but never got it because of so many problems within the system. And so that has been critical. And I know that I've talked with you a little bit, Rosemary, about how I am also seeking PSLF and looking to enroll in that. And I feel like hearing your story is inspiring to me to see that it is possible for folks out there. So can you just talk a little bit about working in public service and if folks should continue applying for PSLF and how that can be something that can help people out?
I would highly encourage people to enroll in that program. And of course, public service, because that has been my whole career trajectory, I think is such an important role that so many people play in our communities and in our country, because we're the very essence of what is community. And public service, whether that's through, I was in emergency management and social service and higher education for all of my career, that all of those folks are the ones that are holding up the rest of the infrastructure in the country. And I hope that there continues to be improvements in that program. In my testimony before the Senate Committee on Aging, I suggested that there be a public service program similar to AmeriCorps and Peace Corps for seniors, to be able to give time versus the money that they don't have, especially upon retirement, in order to retire that debt. Because as Natalia mentioned, I retired at the end of 2020, but I still had many payments left in my public service loan forgiveness program in order to qualify for that forgiveness. And I would have been 85 years old before that came to fruition. So
yeah,
it's a reality for a lot of people. And I had already worked for almost 50 years. So I certainly was not looking forward to being 85 years old just to buy down my student loan debt through my public service.
Yes.
So I would encourage everybody
to
follow
go
that path.
decades, should have to go decades with this debt. And for those of you listening, just to clarify, there was this one-time public service loan forgiveness waiver that expired at the end of October 31st. However, I'm not going to get too wonky here, but there is this one-time income-driven repayment account adjustment, which especially for borrowers that had your loan type, Rosemary, the older FFEL loan type, you can still qualify if you need to consolidate your loans, sign up for the program. Now with the waiver over, who is excluded are people retired. That's what helped you so much during the waiver period, was both the loans part of it and then that you didn't have to be working in your job. But if you do have an older loan type and you're like Rosemary, you've been working in public service and are still working, please consider looking into the PSLF program. And this one-time waiver last year was one of the biggest improvements that I've ever seen to the program. It's our job as advocates to fight to make them permanent or to fight to have them reinstated. We will continue to do that. These programs should work as promised. Sabrina, you should have hope going into public service work and not have to worry whether it's going to work out or not. I would say you're kind of luckier in the sense that these newer loan types and newer programs, it's harder to have the same pitfalls that those of us, I was in the same boat with older loans had. Um, I guess that's my question to you, Rosemary. How do you feel the system do you feel the system's improved at all since when you got started in it?
Yes, I know it has improved. And I think that really is the main underlying message, is that you have to stick with it, because even when that waiver came up in October of 2021, and I waited until I think it was September of 2022 to actually get it together and do all of my employment history and file all those papers, is to not get fatigued and discouraged. You have to go for whatever is coming up and hoping that those programs will stay permanent rather than it being a temporary thing. But really, I think through the SDCC of just understanding that there are different methodologies, you just have to keep on track of it. I think that your organization does a great job of letting people know what's available to them. And then you just have to find the energy and the motivation to go for it, because again, it's, as a 66-year-old person, to get that news just a month ago was the most amazing thing, and something I never expected. So I think that there are things that have improved, and hopefully the Supreme Court will vote in the correct way for all other student borrowers. And I'm going to continue to be an advocate, because I think all people who have suffered from student loan burden debt need to stay on track of advocating for all the others, because there's the people who came before us, there are people who come after us, that will make the difference in keeping the story alive. Because that's the thing where we're at right now, is I think you've done a great job of keeping the spotlight on what this issue is, and that's what's going to change the trajectory of the outcomes.
Thank you for that. I think that is, so kind, but we also can't ignore the fact that it's folks like you who are so passionate and so willing to share your story and to continue fighting despite your debt is now canceled and you no longer have student debt, but you're still fighting. And I think that both you and I have a similar story in that we took action, but we got involved in this like randomly. We didn't study to get involved in this space, but we took action and we're sharing our story, and that's how we really clicked and got involved in this work. And I think it's so critical for folks such as yourself, myself, and all of our generations to continue fighting, because it is a people powered movement, and that's how we're going to get to our victories, and that's how we continue fighting, and that's how things change. And so it's because of people like you, Rosemary, that we're at the point that we're at today.
Yeah. And we are so grateful to have you, Sabrina and Rosemary, as accidental advocates. But we want all borrowers to be Rosemary Anderson. Rosemary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Natalia Abrams and the Leslie Marshall Takeover. We'll be right back.
Great.
If you miss Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
Whoa, a new digital music player. Thanks, Mom.
Oh, I'm glad you like it, because I can't wait to toss the big stereo. And now that we got your dad that big HD TV he wanted, we can throw out our old TV too.
Hold up. You can't just throw out electronics.
Really?
They need to be recycled or donated.
And how would we do that?
It's so easy, Mom. Today, recycling electronics is just as easy as buying them. Greenergadgets.org has all the info. We just enter our zip code to find a certified recycling center nearby. There are thousands of them, and new ones are being added all the time. Some of our local stores are even certified recycling locations.
I like that.
Did you know that some of the stuff in our old electronics could be used to make new products and conserve natural resources?
Well, okay then. Let's gather them up. What was that website again?
Greenergadgets.org. We just enter our zip code and go.
Welcome back to the Leslie Marshall Show. This is Natalia Abrams, and I'm joined again by Cody Hounanian. Welcome back, Cody, and Sabrina Calazans. And we are from the Student Debt Crisis Center and doing our monthly takeover for the Leslie Marshall Show, discussing all things student loan debt. And Cody, I think you were listening in. We just had a really phenomenal conversation. I'm just still ruminating on that with Rosemary Anderson, a great advocate and student loan borrower. So just to, recap, we've been talking about the intergenerational aspect or impact of student loan debt. This is something that burdens borrowers of all ages, threatening long-term financial security for millions of families. While nearly half of federal borrowers are between the ages of 25 and 34, the average 62-year-old borrower, Rosemary was 66, owes $40,000 of their own debt. Not just, that's their own. Many parents have, their students' debt or their children's debt as well added to that overall number. And this is why we need to see Joe Biden cancel student debt. We need to see this get through the courts, and any way possible, we need to see this federal student debt canceled, because everybody deserves relief like Rosemary Anderson. We all borrowers should be Rosemary Anderson. So that was just a great conversation. And Sabrina, I loved hearing about, we were talking about accidental advocacy too, that it doesn't take a lot to be an advocate. So many folks, sign a petition and go from there and are able, like Rosemary, to share her story on a national stage with Senator Warren. So with that, before we move on, just anything you'd like to add, Sabrina or Cody, to our discussion with Rosemary?
Well, I'll start by just saying I'm very proud and inspired by Rosemary coming out and sharing her story so often, so visibly. It takes a lot of courage to do so. So we're so grateful to her. But I also wanted to highlight too, she's not the only one. Our movement has been driven by grassroots supporters speaking out, sharing their story. And Rosemary said it. We've kept this issue alive and at the forefront of the national discussion. And the only way to do that is to share real stories. So grateful to Rosemary, but also grateful to so many other people who are willing to share their stories, either in print, on the radio, on TV, wherever it can be heard and wherever the public can be impacted. It's critical to our movement and our campaign to make a difference.
Yeah, I think, we work with the Free the Degree Coalition, which is younger folks, and we're seeing a lot of folks already at a young age start getting involved in this movement and in this fight. And so it's become a conversation that younger and younger generations are starting to engage in. And I think that is really going to inspire a lot of change and continue pushing the envelope when it comes to this movement and the need to end the student debt crisis. So I'm excited to see the different generations getting involved and leaving their mark on this movement. So it's been really great.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Sabrina. For those listening, our Free the Degree Coalition is a group of college leaders and students that have come together at first to pass resolutions to cancel student debt on their campus, and now they're just hardworking advocates on this issue. And I'll say, when I got started doing this work now well over 10 years ago, we didn't really see college students take a ton of action when it came to student debt. There was a lot of action in free college and lowering tuition. And it seems like everyone has really woken up to the fact that this is impacting all ages and young people, even in college. I hear them, them say I'm a student loan borrower, like I'm in school, but they are aware that they already have a big student loan. And I know when I was in college, I had my head in the sand. I was not even looking at what that balance is, but long ago are those days. And people are keenly aware of what they're dealing with, which I think makes them more active. And Cody, you're absolutely right. That's the power of our organization and of this movement, is the people who have shared their stories that, as Rosemary said, are keeping this alive, so it can't be ignored. So Cody, I'll turn it to you, to go back to where we were at the first segment. What else is there to watch? We, are hearing from borrowers, we're hearing from the news, a lot of attacks on student loan borrowers and on the student loan system. Can you share with us what else is going on?
Yeah, certainly. There is a lot happening. And before I dive into it, I just want to preface it by saying, we are facing an unprecedented level of attacks, but it's only because we've achieved an unprecedented level of success and major victories. Our movement and borrowers have really made a difference over the last few years. So, first up on what else to watch, short of debt cancellation, The next best thing that has improved the lives of millions of student loan borrowers has been the fact that federal student loan payments have been paused since March of 2020 when the pandemic began. That relief was in response to the economic harms and challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. But our research at SDCC has showed that even today, a vast majority, upwards of 80% of borrowers still depend on this payment pause for, financial freedom to allow them to afford rent, support their families, and put food on the table. So the payment pause continues to be something that is absolutely critical to millions of families. What's happened in the last few weeks is that a private student loan company called SoFi, famous for the fact that they are the major sponsor of the LA football stadium, but SoFi, which offers a private student loan product, is suing to stop the federal student loan payment pause, essentially arguing that the federal government has offered borrowers such impactful relief that it has made their private student loan product less desirable or needed to the general public. So to summarize it, essentially, this company is saying that they would like borrowers to not receive relief from the government so that they can turn back on their stream of revenue. Absolutely disgusting. We here, Natalia, Sabrina, and myself, just launched today as an open letter to SoFi and its CEO, Anthony Noto, demanding that they drop this lawsuit immediately. We have spoken to thousands of borrowers, students, and parents. They're unable to put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads, or support their family. And this assault is essentially an attack on their financial freedom and the wellness that they've achieved due to this relief. And keep in mind, the CEO of SoFi was paid over $100 million.
I was just going to say that. Yep. As a bonus. As a bonus.
And wants now to claw back relief from everyday families. So we're really proud of this letter that we launched, and our supporters are equally supportive of this demand. Over 30,000 people have signed a petition in the last few weeks calling for this lawsuit to be dropped immediately. So this company's engendered a lot of bad will from this. And then lastly, one other quick update. Another lawsuit was filed to try to end the pandemic pause. This is from essentially a conservative think tank and its client, and they are arguing another legal gymnastics that the payment pause is harming other programs that help student loan borrowers. Essentially, their silly statement is that relief for borrowers is harmful to borrowers because they'll no longer enroll in another longer-term relief program. It's absolutely silly. So we've got a lot of legal attacks, and our organization really is stepping up and calling on the public to call out this nonsense and try to put a stop to it.
Yeah, I think the thing that's concerning, to me, is it just seems like opponents are trying to, hamper any sense of, going forward. I don't want to box myself in here. If the SCOTUS announcement doesn't go the way it should, which is that this is completely legal and borrowers should start getting their $10,000 to $20,000 in relief. So this is not meant to scare you. These are updates. We just know we're hearing from so many borrowers of the attacks, and we are on it. This letter, open letter to Anthony Noto and to the SoFi executives, is very important. And we are hearing from borrowers that if the payment pause is to end suddenly, that they are not going to be going over to SoFi for any time soon, if at all. That is the feeling we have. Why would you ever want to be with the company that took away this very needed student loan pause? We will do whatever we can to keep you informed and to fight against this. And if you'd like to stay informed, you can follow us at studentdebtcrisis.org. That's our website. Again, that's www.studentdebtcrisis.org. Or you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for the most up-to-date information on student loan debt, and that is at debtcrisis.org. We really appreciate you joining us for this hour to discuss student loan debt, and I am grateful to have Cody and Sabrina by my side. This is Natalia Abrams and the Leslie Marshall Takeover yet again. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Follow Leslie on Twitter. Just go to www.twitter.com/Leslie Marshall, and we'll be sure to share your tweets.